Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of What's on My Desk. Doing this episode as a shout out to one of my viewers. The guy's name is Gary Smith, which asked me a question in one of my last Q&As. Hey Roman, I know dress watches are not the best sellers nowadays, but by any chance you can do a What's on My Desk featuring Haute Horology Dress Watches, and I'm doing just that today. And I picked three pieces from Breguet, from Chopard, and Girard Perregaux that could not be any different from one another, but they certainly fit the theme of dress watches. First, let's get the obvious out of the way. What am I wearing? I'm wearing a dressy watch, and I'm wearing a Ulysse Nardin hour striker with a lapis dial. Won't get into details on this watch because I'm going to do another watch on my desk back to this one, and I'm going to talk about this watch. First, let me address the fact that dress watches are still good sellers. And the reason for that is because majority of people out there still prefer the look of a dress watch, where a lot of my clients still feel that an offshore is not exactly a way to show off a classy watch. And that's what dress watches are. They're still classy watches that date back ages for a lot of these companies, including Girard Perregaux, which is the watch I'm going to start with. Right off the bat, let me direct your attention to what it says underneath the Girard Perregaux logo. It says the year 1791. That's how old Girard Perregaux is. That's right. It's a very old watch company that dates back to the late 18th century. Now, what is this watch? This is the 1966 anniversary watch. Some guys are not big fans of anniversary pieces or limited edition of anniversary pieces. A lot of these companies do that. I actually am a big fan because it reminds a collector, reminds a watch dealer, anybody out there that's into watches, the significance of the history of the company that produces these watches. And this is actually a great piece of history. So let me take you guys back to the 50s and the 60s. 50s and the 60s was a very active and successful period for Girard Perregaux. Numerous patents were achieved during this time period, and the most successful was the gyromatic. That's right, and I'm going to show you the back of the watch. It's this little metal rotor back here that winds the watch. It was introduced in 1957, and then 9 years later, in 1966, they came out with a gyromatic high frequency. It was a watch on the bracelet that looked, surprise, surprise, very similar to this one. In fact, the only difference between the one here and the one I'm sure Ian will pop up on the screen, it has the scale going around the dial. Other than that, the watch looks exactly as it was produced in 1966. So this was the watch that marked that anniversary. They made it in a couple of variations with gold hands, with steel hands. Obviously, it is an automatic. Obviously, it's a gyromatic. What I like about this watch is the fact that, again, it is a throwback in history to a very, very, very important watch in my eyes, an iconic watch in my eyes, one that did a whole lot for the watch industry as we know it today. They made them in a limited run of 50 pieces. Surprise, surprise, 50th anniversary. Makes sense, right? And this is a very simple, understated dress watch as you see it now. It measures at 38 millimeters, which I feel is the perfect size for the watch. It's not too thin, it's also not too thick. This is a watch that screams history, this is a watch that screams class, and this is a watch that also celebrates a very important milestone in horology. Let me show you how this watch sits on the wrist. It's perfect for my small wrist, I'll tell you that right away. Look at that. Classy, dressy, just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful timepiece from Girard Perregaux. And once again, let me stress the fact that this does mark the 50th anniversary of an extremely important step in horology, which is the gyromatic. I won't get into the details of how the gyromatic works, but I'm sure Ian can pull up some old vintage ads from Girard Perregaux that really explain what that really does. I'll give it a pause so you guys can check that out. In 1967, the year following this watch, Girard Perregaux received 73% of all certificates that were issued by the observatory that year. That's a hell of a feat, if you ask me, right? Because they only issued so many, and Girard Perregaux got 73% of them that year. It's a pretty big deal. And last but not least, let's talk about the price tag, $18,400 for this watch, brand new. That's what it retails for today. You can pick these watches up on the market, probably brand new, around the half price mark, maybe even less, again, due to the fate that a lot of the GPs have suffered over the last few years. But nevertheless, a hell of a dressy option at a hell of a price for a hell of a piece of history, if you ask me. Moving right along, I brought a Breguet. How much classier can you get than with a Breguet, right? Reference 5247 chronograph from Breguet. At a glance, a bit of a busy dial, but once you take a closer look, it's actually very good use of real estate if you have a look at the watch. Typical Breguet. I turn this watch sideways. I don't have to show you the face, and you'll tell me right off the bat that this is most definitely a Breguet. Nice large size. This is a 42 millimeter. Let me just compare that to the Girard Perregaux so you can sort of see the difference in size here, right? Not much bigger, but definitely a bigger presence on the wrist. And let me do that. Let me put it on the wrist. Love the strap. Nice rich crocodile strap with the stitching. It's a nice little touch with the stitching, I feel like, because this is a chronograph. This is going to fit onto that dressy yet somewhat sporty collection of watches, as I like to deem that. And of course, last but not least, let's look at the machine. Look at that. Unmistakably Breguet, beautifully decorated open back movement, a beautiful movement, and Breguet does such a good job showing off the movement. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Love this little chronograph. Won't get into the history of Breguet with you guys. I did an entire video dedicated to the history of Breguet. Watch retails for $46,300 to be exact. And today you can pick up this watch on the market brand new, anywhere from 30 to 40 off. And on a secondary market, this watch can be picked up around that half price mark, maybe sometimes even less. Definitely a hell of an option for a dressy watch, if you ask me. Again, with a company with lots of history, lots of innovations under their belt, an unmistakable look of Breguet. There's just some watches out there that, if you look at them from afar, you can pin them down to be many various brands. Breguet is just one of those watches that you know there's a Breguet on your list. And again, something a bit outside of the norm with a bit of a more sportier look for the chronograph. I like what they did there. Keep them with the dressy transitions, keep them with the classy look, yet adding a little bit of that oomph, that sporty oomph to the watch, allowing you to have just something a bit different. If you look at some of the other classique models, a lot of them look the same, where this chronograph stands out like a champ, if you ask me. Last but not least, Chopard, right? When people hear Chopard, watch guys hear Chopard, they automatically think about happy diamonds, right? Those ladies' watches that have the floating diamonds in it, they think about jewelry, they think about various things like clowns and animals and bears and all kinds of funky little jewelry, as well as high jewelry. You know, Chopard make a lot of high jewelry pieces to include watches. Watches is the last thing you think of when you say the name Chopard, but yet Chopard has a wonderful line called L.U.C, which is their precision line. This is Chopard's way of telling the world that, look guys, we're not just a jewelry house, we are a watch powerhouse. Other companies like Bulgari, like Cartier, and Harry Winston take the same bit at it. And Chopard probably is on par with the rest of the houses that I just mentioned, where yes, they may not be the most popular watches, they may not resell really well, but nevertheless you get a lot of bang for your dollar when it comes to Chopard watches, including this Chopard L.U.C Tourbillon that I brought with me today. Yellow gold, 8-day power reserve Tourbillon, manual wind, limited edition of 100 pieces. They made a few variations of this Tourbillon. I last remember Basel 2014, where they introduced this watch with what they called fair-minded gold, which means this was gold that was mined fairly much like fair mined diamonds and so on and so forth. They made a pretty big deal out of it in 2014. I love this shiny crocodile strap. I think it dresses the watch even further. The buckle is nicely done as well, the folding buckle, where it doesn't take up a whole lot of real estate on the outside, but yet it's a pretty heavy duty buckle on the inside. Let's talk about price. Obviously, with this being a Tourbillon, an 8-day power reserve Tourbillon at that, this watch retails for $142,000, where in comparison to some of the other big boys, let's say like AP or Patek, this is actually fairly priced based on what you get, based on the fact that this is an 8-day Tourbillon. What's the resale value of this watch? Well, the fate of every other Chopard watch, especially the high complicated ones, the ones that carry a high retail price tag. Today you can find this watch out there as low as $35,000 to $40,000. Just because on the resale end of things, Chopard does suffer the fate of a lot of these jewelry / watch houses, where it doesn't tend to hold its value because it says Chopard on it. Had this said Patek Philippe on it, it'd probably hold value much better. But I'll tell you one thing, the quality behind the L.U.C stuff that Chopard produces is not any subpar to any other major watch brand, Patek Philippe included. Well, so what does this tell you? If you're out there looking for a dress watch, you have a lot of options. You can pick up a beautiful dress watch under $10,000, you can pick up a beautiful dress watch around that $20,000 to $25,000 price range from a major manufacturer like Breguet. Or you can go with a lesser, I shouldn't say a lesser known brand, but a brand that may seem lesser in the eyes of a watch collector like Chopard or Bulgari or Harry Winston, and pick yourself up a complication at a smoking deal, such as this Chopard L.U.C Tourbillon. Personally, I got to tell you, if I had to pick out of the three, I would have a hard time. And the reason I would have a hard time is because these are not random watches that came across my desk like I normally do. I actually went out and picked a few dress watches out of my safe to answer Gary's question. So when I went there and I was picking these watches, I wanted to get a little bit of history, a big known name, and a bang for your dollar. All of these watches are good bang for your dollar, if you ask me. I'm a big fan of historical watches, and this 50th anniversary is certainly one of those watches that appeals to me from a historic perspective and a big milestone in horology. Anything Breguet to me is super iconic just because of who Breguet was. And then I look at a watch like this, which is $140-some thousand tourbillon that can be picked up at a fraction of a price, a fifth of its original price tag. And I'm saying to myself, wow, this is a high quality tourbillon that can be picked up for that kind of money. When I have a hard time picking something, I turn to you guys, my audience, my followers, and I will ask you the question, regardless of your budget, regardless of whether or not you're buying a watch, if somebody gave you a choice just to take one of these watches, would you go with the Girard Perregaux? Would you go with the Breguet? Or would you go with the Chopard L.U.C tourbillon? Comment your answers below. I would love to hear from you. Last but not least, before I close out, I'm going to ask you guys another question, and that is, what's on my desk? The WOMD episodes are nearing almost 100 episodes, so I'm going to be revamping something in regards to that series. It's not going away. I'm going to replace it with something else. I'm not going anywhere. But ask me more questions in the likes of what Gary Smith asked. You know, that gives me an opportunity to be able to actually do a hands-on answer. A lot of my Q&As are just this. You guys ask me a question, I answer it, and 9 out of 10 times, or 99 out of 100 times, it's nothing that's hands-on. It's just me answering off the top of my head based on my experience and knowledge in the watch industry. But I like these type of questions because these type of questions allow me to do an actual hands-on and actually make suggestions. Because, you know, when Gary asked me about how popular dress watches are and feature some of them on what's on my desk, I love that. Because I have the opportunity to go downstairs in my vault and pick out so many different watches from every walks, company, price range, et cetera, et cetera. It actually allows me to tailor an episode, a hands-on episode to my viewers. So don't shy away from asking me to show certain watches. I may not have a particular watch you may ask about. Again, I don't have everything in my vault, but I do have a pretty good selection, in the very least, especially with a broad question such as dressy watches that I can put forth onto the show. Tell you a little bit about a history, a little bit about value, which are the things that you guys I know love to hear. Other than that, guys, thanks for tuning in as always. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell button. What else is there? Oh yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys next week for more watch reviews and other videos.